A retired Navy SEAL heard a puppy crying beneath a snow-buried dock in Duluth and carried her out minutes before the old roof collapsed. But when the puppy's mother appeared outside the vet clinic in a blizzard, staring through the glass and then vanishing toward the abandoned harbor warehouses, Ryan Whitaker realized the storm had not shown him the whole rescue yet. Snow was falling thick over Duluth before dawn, the kind of lake-effect snow that made the harbor lights look like tired candles behind white glass. Near Canal Park, the wind came off Lake Superior with a clean, cruel edge, filling the gaps between buildings and laying a cold hand on every door that had not been locked well enough. Ryan Whitaker opened his eyes on the narrow bench in the mudroom without needing the alarm. His boots stood under the coat hook's heels lined against the wall. The front door was visible if he turned his head left. The back door was visible if he turned his head right. The basement door sat at the end of the short hallway with a chair angled toward it, because wood swelled in winter and old houses made noises that had no business sounding like movement. He had a bedroom upstairs with a quilt his sister mailed from Ohio and a mattress that cost too much to be ignored. He had slept in that room twice. Both times the softness made his skin prickle, and the ceiling sloped over him like a lid, so the mudroom became his country. Hard bench, 2 exits, no surprises from behind. At 43, Ryan still moved like a man who expected the floor to report him to danger. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with dark brown hair clipped close and a small scar crossing the bridge of his nose where a piece of metal had made its opinion known years ago. His eyes were gray, not gentle at first glance, though. Gentleness lived in him the way heat lives in buried coals. He wore a navy parka over a gray flannel shirt, black work pants, waterproof boots, and a black tactical watch that looked absurd beside the mug of instant coffee he drank, because the proper coffee maker clicked too loudly. He checked the front lock once, then again. His left hand trembled when the bolt answered with a sharp metal sound. He hated that. The hate did nothing useful. The third check came anyway, quieter, as if shame could muffle habit. I had been a Navy SEAL once, trained for cold, trained for water, trained for the long slants. Before a door went open and the world decided who got to breathe afterward. What no one trained him for was returning to a city where snowplows beeped at 3 in the morning, and the furnace knocked inside the walls like a coded warning. He left the house before sunrise because staying inside felt like losing a wrestling match with his own furniture. Outside, the snow reached over the tops of his boots. The street had been plowed once during the night and already forgotten. Tire tracks curved away under fresh powder. Houses crouched beneath white roofs. Chimneys breathed. Ryan walked toward the harbor with his hands in his pockets and his collar raised. He liked Duluth in winter because it asked less from people. Faces disappeared behind scarves. Conversations shortened. Nobody thought it strange when a man kept his eyes moving. The old dock area near the service road had been fenced off in parts, but winter made boundaries soft and foolish. Snow drifted against the chain link until it looked more like suggestion than warning. Ryan followed the road past a frozen bait shack, a closed coffee stand, and a row of storage buildings that had outlived their usefulness but not their stubbornness. The air smelled of iron, ice, diesel, old rope, and the enormous dark lake behind the snow. He stopped beside a low loading dock half buried under drifts. Something had cut through the quiet. Not a gull, not a hinge. A thin sound almost folded into the wind. Ryan went still. His breath slowed without asking permission. The old training rose in him, not dramatic, just clean. Listen, separate, confirm. The sound came again from beneath the dock, a small broken whimper that seemed too weak to survive the distance to his ear. He crouched and swept snow from the edge with one gloved hand. Under the dock, darkness held piles of blown trash, frozen rope, and a cracked plastic crate and electrical cable stiff with ice. He took a flashlight from his parka pocket and angled it low. Two eyes caught the beam. Ryan's throat closed around a word he did not say. A German shepherd puppy lay wedged between a support beam and a coil of cable, her body pressed into a hollow where the snow had drifted through gaps in the boards. She was black and tan-soaked where ice had melted against her chest, trembling so hard the cable shook with her. One ear had started to stand, the other folded sideways in total disagreement with the project. Her front left paw showed a small white mark like snow that had decided to stay. She tried to lift her head and failed. Then she tried again. That did it. Ryan dropped to his stomach and reached beneath the dock, but the gap was too narrow from above. The puppy flinched at the scrape of his glove. "Easy," he said, voice lower than the wind. "You are allowed to distrust me. Smart move, honestly." The puppy blinked. Good. Blinking meant she was still making choices. Ryan crawled around to the side where a broken service panel had pulled away from the dock. The space beneath smelled of cold wood rust and old lake water. His bad knee objected as soon as he slid inside. He ignored it. The snow pressed against his shoulders. A loose sheet of tin above him clicked under the weight building on the roof. That sound made his hand pause. He looked up. A seam of snow had bowed the edge of the small overhang, not yet falling. Thinking about it. "Of course," he muttered. "Couldn't pick a heated lobby." The puppy made a breathy noise that might have been protest. "Fair, lobby dogs are rarely this committed." He moved closer by inches. The cable had looped around her hind leg and tightened with ice. If he pulled wrong, he would hurt her. If he waited, the cold would keep doing its patient work. He took off one glove with his teeth, sucked in air as the cold bit his fingers and worked at the frozen knot. The puppy shook her little ribs, pumping too fast. Ryan kept talking, not because words could explain rescue to a frightened animal, but because tone mattered before language got proud. "No grabbing, no sudden plans. You and I are going to be very boring for a minute." The cable finally loosened. His fingers burned. He slid his other hand beneath her chest palm open. She sniffed him once weakly, then pressed her cold nose to his bare knuckle. Heat moved through him so sharply he almost cursed. Not warmth, recognition. A life asking without knowing it had asked. The tin above them snapped. Ryan pulled the puppy into his parka and shoved backward through the gap. Snow dumped from the overhang the instant his boots cleared the dock, hitting the place where his legs had been with a heavy, breathless thud. He rolled onto his side and held the puppy against his chest. For a few seconds he could hear only his own breathing and the tiny, uneven whistle of hers. "Bad timing," he told her, "but strong exit." She gave no opinion. He stood slowly, tucking the parka around her, and turned toward his truck. Then he saw them. Tracks. Larger paw prints circled the loading dock, deep and frantic, where an adult dog had paced, scraped, tried to dig, then turned away. The snow had already begun filling them, but their path led toward the abandoned warehouses near Rice's Point, where old freight doors hung crooked and roofs sagged under the storm. Ryan stared longer than he needed to. Something had tried to save this puppy before him. Something had been forced to leave. The puppy shivered inside his coat, and that decided the order of things. One life first, questions after heat. He carried her toward the truck while snow erased the prints behind him, and somewhere beyond the white curtain in the direction of the abandoned harbor warehouses, a shape moved once and disappeared. Morning had not brightened so much as turned the snow a paler shade of gray by the time Ryan reached North Shore Animal Care. The small clinic sat on a side street above the harbor, squeezed between a closed hardware store and a laundromat whose neon sign buzzed bravely against the storm. The bell over the clinic door gave a bright little sound when Ryan pushed inside, carrying Snow Wind and the bundled puppy against his chest. Heat hit his face. So did the smell of disinfectant, old coffee, wet dog, and something faintly sweet from a candle someone had lit near the reception desk. Dr. Grace Miller looked up from behind a computer monitor and was already moving before Ryan finished saying, "Found her under the dock." Grace was in her late 30s, compact and steady, with auburn hair tied in a low knot and clear blue eyes that did not waste time on panic. She wore navy scrubs under a gray fleece vest, and a pen had been trapped behind her ear long enough to become part of her anatomy. "Exam table," she said. "Towel there, slowly." Ryan liked her voice, not soft exactly, useful. He set the puppy down on the towel and opened his parka. The little German shepherd looked smaller under the clinic light, all paws and bones and stubborn breath. Her coat was black and tan, dull from wet and grime, with a pale chest and that white mark on her front paw. One ear leaned up. The other had decided the world could wait. Grace warmed towels in a cabinet, checked the puppy's gums, listened to her chest, took her temperature, and moved with the quiet economy of someone who had argued with emergencies for years and refused to let them set the pace. "Cold, dehydrated, exhausted," she said. "Not gone." Ryan stood with his hands at his sides. Snowmelt dripped from his boots and made small dark spots on the tile. Cable caught her leg. She was under the dock. How long? No idea. "Any sign of a litter?" His jaw tightened. "Adult tracks, a lot of them. I didn't see others." Grace glanced up, not accusing him, which somehow made it worse. "You had a hypothermic puppy in your arms. Bringing her in first was right." Ryan nodded once. Right was not the same as enough. The puppy stirred when Grace rubbed warmth into her paws. She made a thin sound and tried to push her nose beneath the towel. Ryan's hand moved before he had permission from himself. He folded the edge closer around her shoulders. Grace saw it and pretended not to. A generous woman, then. The puppy opened her eyes, dark brown and wet, with the confused bravery of very small creatures who have not yet learned how unfair the world can be. She looked at Ryan as if trying to decide whether he was weather or shelter. He had no answer for her. "Shelter is full," Grace said after a while. 3 cats from a frozen garage, 2 older dogs found near the highway, and a terrier who has made a personal enemy of every blanket we own. "I can keep her here until evening, but if she stabilizes, she needs a warm, quiet place. A clinic cage overnight will scare her senseless." Ryan's answer rose fast. No. He had a house arranged like a defensive map. He had a bench in a mudroom, a basement door he did not trust, locks that needed touching, and nights that still broke apart in his hands. He was not the kind of man people handed helpless things to. The puppy blinked again. No demand, no accusation, just life barely held together, looking at him from inside a towel. "One night," he said. Grace did not smile too much. That was another point in her favor. One night can matter. She mixed warm fluids and gave the puppy tiny amounts at a time. Ryan watched every swallow as if the vote of the universe had been placed in a dropper. When the puppy shivered less, Grace cleaned her fur. The black mask around her muzzle appeared from beneath the grime. The tan on her cheeks warmed in the light. The white mark on her paw became clear-shaped like a small patch of snow that had refused to melt. "She needs a name for the chart," Grace said. "Temporary is fine." Ryan looked out the window. Snow moved sideways beyond the glass. His old team had called every path through bad weather a scout line, the first narrow promise that the world ahead could be read if you moved carefully enough. This little thing had been found alone under a dock, but even half frozen, she had lifted her head twice. "Scout," he said. Grace wrote it down. The puppy slept through the naming, which Ryan decided was rude but efficient. By late afternoon, Scout had enough warmth in her to object faintly when placed in a cardboard carrier. The objection began as a squeak. It grew into a wounded complaint by the time Ryan carried her to the truck. "You were buried under a dock this morning," he told her. "Your standards have recovered quickly." She sneezed through one of the carrier holes. Good point. His house did not know what to do with her. Neither did he. He set the carrier in the mudroom first, then reconsidered the draft from the back door and moved it to the kitchen. Then he reconsidered the kitchen because the refrigerator hummed too close to her, so he moved the towels beside the old radiator near the dining room. Scout watched these arrangements with grave suspicion, as if he were building a government she had not voted for. He warmed food exactly as Grace wrote on the instruction sheet. Warm, not hot. Small portions. Check pause. Watch breathing. Call if vomiting. Call if lethargic. Call if anything worried him. That last instruction offended him because it failed to define anything. Scout ate 3 bites, stepped into the water dish with both front paws, looked startled by water as a concept, then backed into Ryan's boot and sat there shivering with dignity. He put a towel around her. She immediately tried to chew its corner. "Recovery has entered a new phase," he said. "The house changed by inches." Tiny nails clicked where only his boots had sounded. A bowl sat where no bowl belonged. His parka hung over a chair, damp and smelling of puppy and lake wind. He checked the front lock once. Scout looked up from the towel. He checked it twice. Scout climbed awkwardly over the edge of the towel and placed her white-marked paw on his boot because balance was difficult and Ryan was large furniture. His hand stopped before the 3rd check. The house went very still. It was not a miracle. It was a puppy using him as a post. Still, the bolt remained untouched. Ryan stepped back. Scout sneezed and bit his shoelace. "Moment ruined," he said, but his voice had changed. Night settled, early snow tapping the windows like fingers that had forgotten why they knocked. Ryan made a place for Scout beside the radiator, then sat on the floor near her because the bench in the mudroom felt too far away. Sleep came in scratches. Each time he woke, he listened for trouble and heard small breathing instead. Near midnight, Scout whimpered in a dream and paddled her paws against the towel. Ryan put 2 fingers lightly on the white mark. "I know," he whispered, unsure which of them he meant. Sometime later, a sound came from the back door. Not the furnace, not a branch, 3 light scrapes against the wood spaced apart by silence. Ryan's body was upright before thought arrived. Scout lifted her head. Her nose pointed toward the dark kitchen window, and from somewhere beyond the glass, buried in the falling snow, came a low sound that was not wind and not quite a bark. Snow kept falling through the next day, thick enough to turn the parking lot of North Shore Animal Care into a white field, broken only by tire ruts and the yellow squares of clinic light. By evening, the street lamps wore soft halos, and every car that passed sounded wrapped in wool. Ryan carried Scout inside for her follow-up, tucked against his chest in the same towel she had spent the afternoon trying to defeat. She had slept, eaten, sneezed at a spoon, and wobbled after him with the confidence of a creature who believed her legs were suggestions. Grace met them in the exam room with her sleeves pushed up and a smear of something orange on one pocket of her scrubs. "Before you ask," she said, "that it is either medicine or baby food. Mystery keeps the work fresh." Ryan set Scout on the table. "She ambushed my boot." Grace nodded seriously. "Advanced recovery." Scout attempted to bite the end of Grace's stethoscope and was denied by a woman who had apparently negotiated with worse criminals. Her temperature was better. Her gums had more color. Her hydration was still not where Grace wanted it, but the tiny body under her hands no longer felt as if it might slip away between breaths. Ryan watched the exam with the severe attention of a man guarding a border. Grace watched him watching and said nothing for a while. "Did you sleep?" she asked. His eyes moved to the window. "Some. That is either a medical answer or a Navy answer." "It is an answer." "Barely." Scout lifted her head before Grace could press further. The puppy went still. Not sleepy still, not cold still. Every small part of her seemed to point toward the rear glass door. One ear rose, the other folded tighter against her head, as if even it had become serious. A thin whine came from her throat, low and searching. Grace turned first. Beyond the glass in the falling snow stood a German shepherd, full-grown, female, thin enough that the line of her ribs moved under her coat when she breathed, but not weak. No, weak was the wrong word. She looked carved by weather and held together by refusal. Her coat was sable with a black back dark as wet coal. Snow dusted her shoulders and muzzle. One ear stood high. The other had a torn edge near the tip. Her amber eyes were fixed on Scout, not on Ryan, not on Grace, not on the bright clinic behind them. Scout whined again, and the dog outside leaned toward the glass with such hunger that Ryan felt it in his own chest. Then fear caught her. Her head turned toward the alley, toward the road beyond the clinic, toward every place a person might appear too fast. "I have seen her," Grace said quietly. Ryan did not move. "Where, behind the dumpsters at dawn a few times. I leave food for strays during cold snaps. She comes after I go inside, never closer than the fence." Scout pressed toward the edge of the table. Ryan placed one hand near her chest, not pinning her, only preventing a fall. The shepherd outside saw the motion. Her eyes snapped to his fingers. Ryan removed his hand slowly. Grace lowered her voice. "She may be the mother." The room narrowed around that sentence. Ryan thought of the adult tracks circling the dock, of the scraped snow of the way the prints led toward the old harbor warehouses. He thought of the sound at his back door in the night. Not a branch. He had known that even before he let himself know it. The mother had followed scent through wind and snow. Not magic. Work. Desperate, precise work. Grace moved away from the door rather than toward it. "Do not rush her." "I know. I am saying it because knowing and doing are cousins who do not always visit each other." Ryan looked at her. She held his gaze. No insult in it, just a line drawn where harm often dressed itself as help. Scout shook beneath the towel, her paws, needing eyes locked on the dog outside. Grace unlocked the back door with a slow turn. The latch clicked too loudly. The shepherd flinched back 2 steps. Ryan lowered himself to one knee several feet from the threshold, shoulders angled away, eyes lowered. Every useful part of his old life wanted to solve the distance. Move, secure, extract, control the door, control the room, control what might happen before it happened. He folded those instincts down one by one like dangerous tools and kept his hands open. Grace opened the door halfway. Snow blew in, first thin and dry. Cold touched the exam room floor. Scout made a small broken cry, not loud, not even strong, but the sound pierced the room cleanly. The shepherd stepped forward, one paw reached the threshold. Mud and snow darkened the mat. Her nose worked, gathering Scout Clinic soap, medicine, human skin fear. Heat the towel, Ryan's parka hanging by the hall where Scout had slept in its folds that morning. The mother looked at Scout's face, at the black mask, at the white paw mark, at the uneven ears. Her body trembled once. Ryan expected a rush, then some clean reunion, a mother crossing the last feet because love had won. The world was not so tidy. The shepherd's body stayed angled toward the alley that led down toward Rice's Point and the abandoned warehouses. Not fleeing. Divided. Scout was here. Something else was there. Ryan saw it as clearly as a red circle on a map. The mother was not afraid only of coming closer. She was afraid of staying. Grace breathed, "Easy, girls." The shepherd's eyes flicked to her and away. Ryan did not speak. The dog lowered her head and gave one low whine, almost swallowed by the snow. Scout answered higher, urgent, her little paws scraping the towel. Ryan kept still, though every nerve in him pulled tight. The shepherd took another half step, Then from the alley, a snowplow dropped its blade with a metallic crash against pavement. Ryan's left hand jerked before he could stop it. The shepherd bolted back from the threshold. Scout cried out. Grace did not chase. Ryan did not rise. The dog stopped at the far edge of the clinic light sides, heaving amber eyes, furious with fear. For one suspended second, she looked at Ryan as if measuring whether the danger had come from him. He opened his empty hand and placed it flat against the floor. No command, no apology dramatic enough to matter. Just stillness. The shepherd turned into the snow. She moved down the alley, not running wildly, but with urgent purpose toward the old freight line and the row of warehouses where roofs sagged beneath the weight of winter. At the corner, she looked back. Not long, long enough. Then she vanished. Grace closed the door gently. Scout kept crying until the sound thinned into exhausted breaths. Ryan lifted her into his arms, towel and all. She pressed her face into his shirt. Grace leaned against the counter. "Raven," she said. "That is what I have been calling her in my head, which I foolishly pretended did not count." Ryan repeated the name. Raven. It fit. Not because she was dark, though she was, but because she seemed made of cold intelligence. Wary movement and a loyalty that would cross a city in a blizzard without asking anyone's permission. Grace wrote Raven on a sticky note beside Scout's chart, then added possible mother in smaller letters. Ryan stared at the words. Possible mother, possible others, possible danger, possible rescue. Grace followed his gaze. If there are more puppies, we move carefully. She went toward the warehouses. Then you do not go after her tonight. His jaw worked once. I know. Do you? He looked at the back door where the last wet mark from Raven's paw darkened the mat. Waiting had never felt harmless to him. Waiting was the breath before impact, the second before a door opened the space where men got hurt because someone delayed. But this was not that. There was no enemy behind Raven's fear, no target, no clean victory waiting for speed. I will not chase her, he said. Grace believed him after a moment. Ryan took Scout home through streets blurred by snow and plow lights. He slowed when he passed the alley toward Rice's Point. The warehouses sat beyond the fence line. Black shapes in white weather, no movement a reasonable man could use as proof. Still, Ryan knew Raven had not been inviting him. She had been returning. At home, he set Scout near the radiator and checked the front lock once. His fingers hovered. Scout sighed in her sleep. He lowered his hand. Outside, somewhere under a roof carrying too much snow, a mother named Raven kept moving toward whatever she had not been able to bring into the light. Dawn came to Duluth as a dim whitening of the storm, with snow still falling hard enough to make the houses across Ryan Street look like memories of houses. The plows had been through once, leaving ridges along the curbs and a low grinding sound that moved through the neighborhood before fading toward the harbor. Ryan stood at his kitchen counter with coffee cooling untouched beside his hand, and Scout asleep in a towel nest near the radiator. She had eaten twice during the night, complained about both meals as if service could improve, then fallen asleep with her white-marked paw resting on the corner of Ryan's boot. He had not followed Raven. That should have made the morning easier. It did not. Waiting had teeth. Every few minutes his eyes moved to the window, to the white street, to the direction where the warehouses sat beyond blocks and rail lines and bad weather. Grace's warning stayed with him. If Raven had more puppies, rushing her could make her move them. Moving them in this cold could kill them. So Ryan did the thing that felt least natural. He asked. Bennett's Diner opened at 5:30 because Nora Bennett believed breakfast should be ready before regret had time to settle in. The diner sat 2 streets above the harbor with red vinyl stools, fogged windows, and a sign that flickered whenever the wind came hard from the lake. When Ryan stepped inside, bells on the door gave a small jangle and warm air wrapped around him with the smell of coffee. Bacon toast, wet wool, and lemon cleaner. Nora Bennett looked up from behind the counter. She was in her mid-60s, short and sturdy, with silver hair pinned into a knot that had no patience for vanity. She wore a dark green sweater under a flour-dusted apron, and her eyes were the kind that had seen grief enough times to stop being fooled by silence. "Ryan Whitaker," she said, "you are in here before sunrise and not ordering the usual black coffee to go. Either the lake has apologized or you need something. I need to ask about a dog." Nora set down the coffee pot as if he had placed a glass bird between them. "Sable shepherd, torn right ear, looks like she would judge a man for owning cheap boots." Ryan felt his attention sharpen. "You have seen her, fed her, been rejected by her, developed a rich one-sided friendship." Nora reached under the counter and pulled out a small spiral notebook with a cover worn soft at the corners. "I started writing times down because I am nosy, widowed, and old enough to call it civic responsibility." She flipped past grocery lists, prayer names, delivery notes, and one page that read, "Tell Tyler to stop salting the front step like he is preserving fish." Then she tapped a line. 3 weeks ago, 6:10 in the morning. Took scrambled eggs behind the dumpster, did not eat them there. Carried them off. Another page. 4 days later, 5:40, chicken scraps, same direction. Toward Rice's Point. Ryan leaned closer. "Always carrying food. Toward the end, yes. That is when I figured babies." Nora's voice thinned on the word but did not break. "Or hoped babies, which is a dangerous thing to hope in weather like this." Ryan told her about Scout, under the dock, cable around the leg, hypothermic but alive. Nora pressed one hand flat against the counter. For a moment, all the diner noise seemed to move around her without touching. The grill hissed. A man in the corner coughed. The wind hit the window and dragged snow across the glass in long, white scratches. "Bless that little thing," Nora said. Then softer, "And bless the mother that went looking." She packed a paper bag without asking permission. Cooked chicken, a container of rice, old towels, a thermos of warm water. Ryan reached for his wallet. Nora looked at him over her glasses. "Do not insult my grief before 6 in the morning." He froze. She tied the bag handles with efficient hands. "My husband Jack went out on Superior during a December blow 12 years ago. The boat made it back. He did not. After that, I began leaving food behind the diner. Cats first, then dogs, then whatever creature had enough sense to come where the coffee is decent." She pushed the bag toward him. "Hunger outside a warm door is a sound some people cannot unhear." Ryan took the bag. "Thank you. There are manners under all that weather." "Good." Tyler Brooks came in while Nora was pouring coffee for 2 road workers. He was 26, lean, red-faced from wind, with sandy hair smashed under a knit cap and a reflective jacket half zipped over a hoodie. Snow clung to his eyelashes. "If anyone asks, I did not nearly bury Mr. Hansen's mailbox again." The mailbox moved emotionally. Nora pointed a spoon at him. "Sit down before your lies freeze." Ryan turned. "You drive the harbor plow route." Tyler's joking faded a little. "Some days. Have you seen a sable German shepherd near the old warehouses?" Tyler wiped his gloves together. "Yeah, early mornings. She cuts behind the old rail shed when the snow is not too deep, uses the lee side of the blue warehouse, and then crosses near the freight doors. Not a safe path now." "Could you show it?" "Show from a distance, yes. March in like we own the place, no. Floors are bad and the roofs are holding enough snow to make an insurance man find religion." That was useful. Ryan hated how useful everyone was becoming. It meant he could not carry the whole thing alone and call that strength. Grace answered on the second ring when he called from the diner hallway. "I was hoping you would call instead of disappearing into the harbor like a grim holiday special. Nora has feeding times. Tyler knows the route. Good, I am calling Megan Foster. Animal control. County animal control. She sounds like gravel in a snowblower and she is very good. Megan arrived at the diner 20 minutes later in a county truck wearing charcoal cargo pants, a gray parka, waterproof boots, and a knit cap pulled low over short dark hair streaked with silver. She listened without interrupting. That alone made Ryan respect her. When Grace finished explaining Scout's condition and Raven's behavior, Megan looked directly at Ryan. Former military? He did not ask how she knew. Former. Then this will be practice. You are not in command of the dog. Tyler nearly smiled into his coffee. Nora hid hers behind the pot. Ryan kept his face still. Megan continued. No chasing, no cornering, no crowd at the entrance, food station, warm water, scent familiarization, if the mother allows it. We let her choose distance. If she has pups, our job is to make the next good choice easier, not force the whole rescue today. Ryan looked toward the window. Snow hammered the glass. And if the roof fails, then we plan faster without moving stupid. Grace nodded. Nora slid a plate of eggs in front of Megan. You speak my language. Megan glanced at the plate. I did not order. Emergency carbohydrates. No one argued with Nora. By noon, they had a map spread across the diner counter. Nora marked the times Raven came. Tyler drew the safer approach along the rail shed and circled places where drifts formed deep enough to hide broken boards. Grace noted Scout's scent items, medical supplies, and the risk of stress. Megan wrote a simple plan in block letters. Same route, same distance, same people, no sudden heroics. Ryan stared at the page until the lines stopped looking like a mission and began looking like a town, slowly remembering how to place hands beneath one weight. Scout slept at the clinic while they planned, warm and offended by a sweater Grace had put on her. Ryan visited her before evening. She wobbled to the front of the crate and pressed her nose through the bars. He touched the white mark on her paw. Your mother has been busy, he said. Scout licked his finger, then tried to chew it because gratitude was apparently negotiable. The radio near the reception desk crackled with a weather alert. A lake effect band had stalled over the North Shore. Another 12 to 18 inches possible in 48 hours. Wind chills falling. Travel difficult. Grace and Ryan looked at each other. Outside, snow thickened until the harbor vanished block by block. Somewhere under an old roof, Raven was guarding whatever she had not brought with her, and winter had begun adding weight to every hour they waited. The next morning over Duluth came in pewter and white with snow still falling but not yet wild in the harbor below. Rice's Point looked like a place the world had almost erased and then changed its mind about. Wind dragged loose powder across the plowed service lane in pale ribbons. Old rails showed through in places, two dark lines leading toward the freight warehouses like thoughts Ryan did not want to finish. He stood beside Grace's hatchback while Megan checked the latch on a small equipment sled, and Tyler stamped his boots near the county truck. Nora had insisted on coming as far as the diner parking lot and sending enough food to feed a rescue crew, a sled team, and possibly a choir. For Raven, she had said, then added, and for men who forget they are made of blood, not bolts. Ryan carried the paper bag without comment. Scout stayed at the clinic. Bringing her would have been too much for everyone, especially Scout, who believed the entire world existed to be reached immediately with both front paws. Grace had tucked a towel Scout slept on into a sealed bag and handed it to Ryan with the seriousness of a field surgeon passing an instrument. Sent only if Megan says, she told him. Megan had heard. Veterinarians are annoying when correct. Grace smiled. Animal control officers are charming when they admit it. Tyler looked between them. This is the warm professional cooperation I feared. No one laughed loudly. The warehouses sat ahead beyond a low rise of snow and old plow berms, long shapes with patched metal roofs. Freight doors frozen on their tracks and windows clouded with frost from the inside. They had once stored ship parts, fishing gear, coils of cable, and seasonal tools. Now they stored weather silence and whatever the city did not know how to repair. Tyler led them along the lee side of a blue warehouse where the snow lay shallower. "Safe-ish," he called over his shoulder. Megan answered, "Keep saying that. It keeps people humble." Ryan noticed she watched not only the ground, but him too. That might have irritated him yesterday. Today it steadied something he would not have named. The third warehouse stood nearest the old freight platform, its roof sagging under a thick blanket of snow. Ice hung from the gutters in clear spears. One sliding door stood open, a foot jammed by drifted snow at the bottom. Raven appeared in the gap before they reached it. She did not bark. That made all of them stop faster than barking would have. Her sable coat was dusted white, black back ridged with cold amber eyes burning from under the dark line of her brow. The torn right ear twitched toward Tyler, then Grace, then Megan, then Ryan. Her body blocked the opening as completely as a locked gate. Ryan's hand tightened on the food bag. Megan lifted 2 fingers low at her side. "Stop!" He stopped. Raven's gaze moved to the bag and then to the sealed towel pouch. She smelled scout through plastic, through cold. Through the distance humans thought mattered more than it did. Her shoulders shifted, not softer, less certain of only one thing. Megan spoke without looking away from Raven. "Food station on the flatboard near the red barrel. Warm water beside it. Then back." Ryan moved slowly, body angled away. The snow squeaked under his boots, loud as betrayal. He crouched at the place Megan indicated, opened Nora's container of chicken and rice, and set it down with the lid tucked beneath. So the smell rose cleanly into the cold. Steam curled up and vanished. He poured warm water into a collapsible bowl, the surface trembling as wind touched it. Raven watched every motion. When Ryan backed away, his muscles argued. Every part of him wanted to close distance, to search, to know. But Raven did not need his urgency. She needed proof he could leave space unbroken. He returned to the others. They waited. Waiting in the cold was not passive. It entered the fingers first, then the jaw, then the thoughts. Tyler shifted once and stopped when Megan glanced at him. Grace kept her medical bag low against her side. Ryan counted Raven's breaths because counting was something his mind did when it did not trust prayer. Raven stepped out after 3 full minutes. One paw, then another. She circled the food rather than approaching straight. She smelled the snow around it, the bowl, the air behind Ryan, the tracks they had made. Only then did she eat, not fast. Not like hunger had made her foolish. She took pieces and swallowed while keeping her head ready to lift. After the 4th mouthful, a sound came from the darkness behind her. Tiny, thin, not the building, not wind. Grace's face changed. Tyler mouthed something Ryan was grateful not to hear. Raven whipped back toward the doorway and placed herself between them and the dark. Her head lowered. Still no bark. The silence had teeth enough. Megan held up her hand. "Nobody moves." Ryan let his eyes adjust beyond Raven's outline. Inside the warehouse, the floor dropped in places where boards had rotted. Snow had blown through holes in the roof, making white islands over black wood. Near the back wall, beneath a broken conveyor ramp and a stack of old pallets, something moved in a nest of burlap, insulation, and torn canvas. One small muzzle appeared black and tan. A front paw followed with a dark patch across the toes. Behind it, lower in the nest, another puppy lifted a sable face, smaller, with a pale mark down the bridge of her nose that caught what little light entered the room. Ryan felt the truth settle into him without ceremony. Scout had not been alone. Grace whispered, 2. Ryan nodded once. 2. Raven's eyes never left them. The larger puppy nosed forward, bold or hungry or too young to understand caution. Raven made a low sound meant for her child, not for the humans. The puppy stopped and folded back into the nest. Good, smart, alive. Megan's voice remained even. We are not going in. Grace's hands flexed around the medical bag. Her profession pulled her toward the puppies. Her wisdom held her where she stood. They look responsive, she said. Responsive buys time, Megan replied. Tyler stared at the roof. That roof buys less. Snow slid above them with a faint whisper. Everyone looked up. The roof groaned, not collapsing, just complaining in the slow, deep voice of old metal under winter weight. Ryan lowered the sealed towel pouch. Megan shook her head once. Not yet. Jacket first. The one Scout was wrapped in. Ryan removed his navy parka. Cold closed around his shoulders hard enough to make him inhale through his teeth. The parka still held Scout's scent because he had not been able to wash it. Mud Clinic soap puppy warmth, his house lake snow. He folded it and placed it on the same flat board farther from the entrance than his body wanted, closer than Raven had allowed yesterday. Then he stepped back. Raven waited a long time. Snow gathered in Ryan's hair and melted down the back of his neck. He did not move. Raven approached the parka in a half circle, never turning her back fully to the people. She smelled one cuff, then the collar. Her nose pressed into the place Scout had slept against Ryan's chest. The change in her was small, but Ryan saw it. A fraction less iron in her spine. A breath that went deeper than survival. She gripped the parka in her teeth and dragged it backward across the snow-dusted boards. Tyler made a sound and swallowed it. Raven pulled the coat into the warehouse, carried it beneath the conveyor ramp, and shoved it toward the 2 puppies. The larger one crawled onto the sleeve. The smaller one tucked her face into the lining. Grace turned her head slightly, blinking hard. Megan wrote something on her waterproof clipboard. Ryan almost smiled at the absurdity. The world had moved by half an inch and paperwork had followed it. They left more food, more water, and 2 folded towels on a crate Raven could reach. No one entered. No one celebrated. As they backed away, the wind strengthened, pushing snow from the roof in soft spills. Ryan looked once more at the dark nest, at the 2 living shapes pressed against his parka, at Raven standing between them and every wrong thing the world had taught her. Then the roof above the nest cracked with a sharp, splintering report, and a drift of snow fell through a seam in the metal, dusting Raven's back like ash. For the next 2 weeks, Duluth lived under snow, and Ryan Whitaker measured his days by what Raven would allow. The harbor changed constantly under the weather, blue at dawn, white by noon, gray by evening. Every surface salted, scraped, buried, revealed, and buried again. Raven allowed almost nothing at first. She allowed the food bowl to exist 6 yards from the warehouse door if Ryan placed it without looking straight at her. She allowed warm water if Grace stayed behind the leaning post with the orange survey ribbon. She allowed Tyler to clear a narrow path only after he worked sideways, speaking apologies to the snow shovel, the boards, the old freight platform, and once to a rusted barrel that had offended his shin. Megan called that progress. Ryan called it maddening inside his own head and said nothing aloud. Consistency, Megan told him, was not dull to a frightened animal. It was mercy arriving on schedule. So Ryan became predictable. That was harder than crawling under fire had ever been in some ways. His old life had taught him to vary routes, change timing, study sightlines, never present the same pattern twice. Now he parked in the same place, stepped over the same rail. Set the bowl on the same board. Backed away the same number of steps and kept his hands where Raven could read them. Every repetition felt like standing in open country wearing a bright coat. Raven watched from the warehouse door with amber eyes. On the first day after they found the two pups, she waited until Ryan had retreated to the service road before she ate. On the third day, she approached with him still in sight. On the fifth, she drank water while Grace stood at the post. On the seventh, she pulled one of Nora's towels into the nest and arranged it with sharp little motions that made Tyler whisper, "She has interior design standards." Megan said, "Everyone deserves standards." Tyler looked at the sagging roof. Hers are higher than the buildings. The larger puppy earned the name Flint because his dark paws kept bracing as if he had been born, ready to stand guard over things twice his size. The smaller one became Birch because the pale mark down her nose looked like a stripe of bark under snow. Grace named them only for medical notes, she claimed. Nora laughed when Ryan told her, "People who say only before a name are already lost." At home, Scout grew stronger with indecent speed. The house had been quiet for 11 months, controlled by locks, folded blankets, clean counters, and a man who placed each object where anxiety could find it again. Scout respected none of that. She discovered chair legs, bootlaces, the dish towel, one cardboard box, 2 receipts, and the corner of Ryan's Tide and street map, which she bit with such determination that he told her she was undermining city infrastructure. She sneezed when annoyed, which was often. She stepped into her water bowl and seemed surprised every time. Her one upright ear gave her a brave expression, while the folded ear suggested she had doubts about management. The towel nest moved from the radiator to the mudroom, then back to the dining room, then beside Ryan's bench because Scout wanted him in sight. After a week, the nest stopped mattering because she slept on his boot whenever possible. Her white-marked paw pressed against the leather like a signature. Nights remained uneven. Ryan still woke with his heart too fast. The furnace still knocked. Snowplows still dropped their blades with metal crashes that made his left hand tremble. But now, when he sat upright in the dark, Scout usually lifted her head, looked personally offended by his insomnia, and crawled into his lap with the determination of a warm sandbag. No wisdom, no speeches, just wait. Sometimes that was better. One night after a plow passed and his breathing went shallow, Scout climbed onto his thigh, put her nose under his hand, and sighed as if the entire arrangement had been her idea. Ryan touched the white mark on her paw. "Still here," he whispered. He did not know which of them needed to hear it. The town joined the rescue in ways that made him uncomfortable. Nora set a glass jar near the diner register with a handwritten sign that read, "For Raven and the Snow Babies." Someone dropped in quarters. Someone left a $5 bill folded into a tiny square. One child added a plastic button shaped like a yellow moon, which Tyler declared legal tender in emergency cuteness situations. Ryan saw the jar and stopped short. "I can cover the food," he said. Nora did not look up from pouring coffee. "I know. Then why the jar?" "Because other people have hands." He stood there silent while a retired ironworker at the counter pretended to study the pie case with great scholarly focus. Nora softened her voice. "This is not about whether you can carry a thing, Ryan. It is about whether the rest of us are allowed to stand under it with you." He dropped a 20 into the jar because arguing with Nora before breakfast felt both pointless and slightly dangerous. She nodded. "Look at that." The diner survived community involvement. At the warehouse, Megan began the slow introduction of the carrier. "Not trap, carrier," she corrected Tyler every time. "Words matter," she said. "A trap betrays. A carrier offers an exit." The first day, the carrier sat far from the entrance door, removed empty and harmless. Raven ignored it with dramatic focus. The second day, Nora's towel moved near it. The fourth, the towel went halfway inside. The sixth, Raven smelled the carrier, sneezed once, and walked away. "She hates it," Tyler whispered. Megan did not look up from her clipboard. She noticed it and did not flee. Do not make progress, wear a parade uniform. Ryan saved that sentence somewhere private. Near the end of the second week, Grace decided Scout was strong enough to come near the outer edge of the area, not close, not reunion. Controlled sight and scent. Scout arrived in a small harness bundled in a ridiculous red sweater Nora donated because, in her words, dignity was overrated when one's belly was cold. Ryan stood beside Grace at the far side of the cleared path. Scout smelled the harbor and changed. Her playful wobble stopped. Her nose lifted. Her ears strained forward, one more successfully than the other. At the warehouse door, Raven appeared. The distance between them filled with snow, human caution, animal memory, and the fragile shape of doing the right thing slowly. Scout made a sound from deep in her small chest. Raven answered once. Flint poked his head from behind her legs. Birch blinked beside him. No one spoke. Ryan's hands tightened around the leash, then loosened. Love was not always closing distance. Sometimes it was keeping distance alive long enough that fear did not win. Scout sat trembling in the snow. Raven lowered herself to the threshold rather than retreating. Grace breathed out. Megan wrote one word on her clipboard. Good. That evening, Ryan carried Scout home through a sky the color of bruised steel. The radio on his kitchen counter crackled while he warmed Scout's food. Weather alert, a stronger lake effect band was forming over Superior. Whiteout conditions possible. Heavy accumulation. Wind chills dangerous. Ryan turned the volume up. Scout lifted her head from beneath the table. The announcer named road closures, drifting risks, and flat roofs under snow load. Ryan looked at the map spread on his table at the warehouse, circled in pencil at the place where the roof had cracked. Outside, snow began striking the windows harder, and in the old harbor, winter kept adding weight to Raven's roof. By late afternoon, Duluth had gone nearly colorless, and the snow over the harbor moved sideways in sheets so thick the lake itself disappeared. From Ryan's kitchen window, the world looked erased beyond the first row of houses, leaving only streetlights, plow flashes, and the dark skeletons of bare trees whipping in the wind. The radio repeated the warning until the words stopped sounding like language and became a clock. Whiteout conditions, rapid accumulation, wind chills below zero, travel restricted near the waterfront. Ryan stood over the map with a pencil in his hand, and Scout asleep under the chair, her sweater half twisted, because she had battled it with conviction and lost without admitting defeat. He marked the warehouse again, though the circle was already dark. He marked the service road Tyler said might stay open longest. He marked the high patch near the old rail office where Grace could wait with the warmed vehicle. He marked the flat roof section that had cracked. The pencil point broke. The small snap made his left hand tighten. Scout lifted her head and blinked at him from under the chair. "I am fine," he said. She sneezed. That was not a formal diagnosis. He looked at the truck keys on the counter. Fear had a taste, sometimes metal at the back of the tongue. Movement had always been the way to make it useful. Move before danger set. Reach before the window closed. Go before someone else paid for your hesitation. His hand went to the keys. Scout crawled out and set her chin on his boot. Not dramatic, not noble. She just put warm weight against him because he had become part of the furniture of her small world. Ryan closed his eyes. "Not alone," he said quietly. His phone was in his hand before the old self could argue him into secrecy. Grace answered immediately. "You are looking at the map." "Yes." "You are thinking about going alone." "I was." "Good tense." He glanced down at Scout. "Road closures in under an hour. Megan is already calling county dispatch. Tyler is checking which plow routes are still open. Nora has packed enough towels to start a hotel, Ryan exhaled once, almost a laugh. This is not a hotel situation. No, but she has a gift for making disasters smell like chicken. Nora answered his call on the first ring and did not say hello. I have blankets, towels, thermoses, a battery lantern, and chicken. Grace told me. Grace is a gossip with a medical degree. Nora. Her voice changed. Not softer exactly, closer. I know. I am meeting you at the clinic. And Ryan, do not make yourself the whole rescue. That mother dog has already done enough surviving alone. He had no quick reply to that. Nora did not wait for one. The clinic became their staging point because its backlot sat higher than the harbor roads and Grace had generator heat, if the power failed. Snow gathered on the security light until it glowed through a white cap. Megan stood beside the county truck with her clipboard sealed in a plastic pouch, short hair hidden beneath a black knit cap parka zipped to the chin. Tyler arrived in his plow jacket with a coil of rope slung over one shoulder and his face arranged into humor that did not quite cover fear. I would like the record to show I am opposed to weather as a concept, he said. Megan took the rope, tested the knot, and handed it back. The record is unimpressed. Nora came through the clinic door carrying canvas bags. Her silver hair was tucked under a red scarf, her cheeks bright from cold, her mouth set with the expression of a woman who had once lost an argument with a storm and never forgiven weather for being smug about it. She stopped by Ryan's truck where Scout sat in the passenger seat inside a blanket nest, strapped in as Grace had ordered. Scout pressed her nose to the glass and fogged a small circle. Nora touched 2 fingers to the window. "Little Scout," she murmured. Scout licked the inside of the glass with solemn commitment. "Excellent field report." Grace brought out the towel Scout had slept on the night before, pale blue with small ducks printed along the edge because Nora believed practical items did not need to be gloomy. The towel looked ridiculous in Ryan's hands. It also weighed more than rope. Familiar scent, safe room, warm breath, a piece of one living promise carried toward another. Megan spread the map across the hood of the county truck. Snow dotted the plastic sheet at once. We do not enter if the roof is actively failing. We do not block Raven's exit. We do not close the carrier until she is inside with the pups. We do not separate the pups from her unless there is immediate collapse and Grace says medical urgency requires it. Ryan, you place the carrier and back off. Tyler, you light the boards, not Raven's face. I handle the door if she chooses it. Grace stays with Scout at the high road unless called forward. Nora stays with Grace. Nora narrowed her eyes. I am not decorative. No, you are logistics, heat towels, and the person who can make Ryan obey by sounding disappointed. Ryan looked up. Nora smiled without innocence. Tyler coughed into his glove. Grace adjusted Scout's blanket through the cracked truck door. Scout can call once if Raven freezes. Once. Maybe twice. Short. The sound may help her connect the carrier scent to a living pup, but too much will panic everyone, including Scout. Scout wagged because she heard her name and assumed praise was overdue. Ryan stroked her head. Command center, he told her. She tried to climb into his sleeve. No mutiny. The wind pushed snow across the lot so hard it hissed against the vehicles. Ryan stood beside the truck door, one hand flat on the frame, and felt the old battle inside him shift. Not vanish. Shift. In his old life, waiting for the word had meant accepting that another man's timing might save or kill. Tonight, waiting meant trusting that 5 people could be wiser than one frightened heart with good intentions. He did not like it. That did not make it less true. Megan listened to her radio, spoke with dispatch, then looked toward the harbor. Road near the lift bridge is closing in 40 minutes. We go now or we wait until morning. Grace's mouth tightened. The roof may not hold until morning. Tyler checked the rope again. The service lane is bad but passable if we stay behind the county truck. Nora opened one thermos and poured coffee into a metal cup, then handed it to Ryan. Drink. Shaking from caffeine is less embarrassing than shaking from being human. He took the cup. It burned his gloved fingers through the metal. That helped. They went in two vehicles, the county truck first, Ryan's truck behind, headlights swallowed by moving snow. The city narrowed to red taillights and the pale blade of the plow. Tyler had begged a co-worker to run ahead until the last turn. At the high patch near the old rail office, Grace climbed into Ryan's truck with Scout and kept the heat running low. Nora sat beside her with towels stacked in her lap like folded prayers. Ryan opened Scout's door a few inches. The puppy lifted her head, eyes bright and unsure. "Stay warm," he said. Scout touched his glove with her nose. Then he closed the door and turned toward Megan and Tyler. The warehouses were barely visible beyond the whiteout. Somewhere inside one of them, Raven waited with flint and birch beneath a roof winter was trying to bring down. Megan checked the road closure alert on her radio and looked at Ryan. 30 minutes before this lane is blocked. The wind erased her footprints almost as soon as she made them. Night came hard over the Duluth harbor. Though the hour was still early and the snow in the old warehouse district moved so thickly through the beams of their headlamps that it seemed alive. The lake was invisible, but its presence pressed through the dark in wind, cold in the low, hollow moan that traveled between metal walls and abandoned freight doors. Ryan followed Tyler along the cleared edge of the service lane with the open carrier held against his side. It was bulky, awkward, and made worse by the wind catching its plastic shell. Inside lay Scout's blue duck towel, a folded dry blanket, one rag from Nora's bag, and a small container of warm chicken placed far enough back that Raven would need to step fully inside to reach it. The door was tied open, not a trap, an exit. Megan walked behind Ryan with one hand on the safety rope clipped to a metal post. Tyler led with his headlamp pointed low, showing boards, rails, ice patches, and holes the snow had softened into lies. "Safe-ish," he called, voice nearly stolen by wind. Megan answered, "Useful. That is the nicest thing anyone has said to me today. Do not get sentimental on a slick board." The humor helped because it was thin and human and could not pretend the night was simple. Ryan placed each boot carefully. Snow hit the side of his face like thrown sand. His breath froze along the edge of his scarf. Beneath all of it, he could hear his heart. Too fast. Old fast. A speed with memories attached. He forced his hand to loosen on the carrier handle. Scout was safe with Grace in the warm truck. Nora had one hand full of towels and the other ready to pray, scold, or pour coffee depending on what the next minute required. He was not alone. The thought did not make him comfortable. It made him steadier. The third warehouse emerged from the whiteout in broken pieces. First the dark rectangle of the doorway, then the snow-loaded roof bowed at the center, then the orange ribbon Tyler had tied to the leaning post thrashing in the wind. The sliding door had opened wider than before, pushed by gusts or Raven's movement. Snow had drifted across the threshold and the lower boards inside were dusted white. Raven stood on the pallet platform beneath the broken conveyor. She was soaked and rimed with snow, her black sable back flattened by wet, cold legs, braced head low. Flint pressed against her left side, bigger now, but still too small for the weather. Birch huddled beneath Raven's chest, pale nose stripe visible when the light caught it. Raven's amber eyes found Ryan, then the carrier, then the space beyond them where the high road lay hidden in storm. She did not bark. The absence of sound made the roof groan seem louder. Tyler angled his headlamp down, careful not to shine in her face. Megan stopped outside the doorway, leaving a clear path for Raven to bolt if she chose. That mattered. Ryan stepped inside only to the driest section near the entrance where the floor still held. Water from melted snow gleamed between boards. The warehouse smelled of wet wood rust, old rope, animal fear, and the sour cold of a building losing its argument with winter. A strip of torn metal overhead clattered in the wind. Raven flinched but did not move from the pups. Ryan lowered the carrier to the floor. The plastic touched wood with a small hollow knock. Raven's ears snapped forward. Everyone froze. Even Tyler held his breath badly enough that Ryan could hear the effort. Nothing happened. Snow blew through a roof seam and dusted the carrier. Ryan knelt beside it, not between Raven and the door, never blocking, never crowding. He placed both hands open on his thighs. The old instinct to command rose in his chest and found no voice. He had used command tones in darker places, in rooms where hesitation could take lives. Here, command would break the only fragile thing they had spent 2 weeks building. So he spoke low, nearly part of the storm. "No one is taking them." Raven stared at him. Her sides moved hard. "No one is leaving you." Meaning might not cross species in full. Tone could. Tone was older. Tone was the first bridge. Megan shifted one careful step to the side, ready but not reaching. Ryan slid the edge of Scout's blue towel so it draped over the carrier lip. The printed ducks looked absurd under warehouse grime, small yellow shapes with cheerful beaks in a place where cheer had no practical reason to exist. Maybe that was why it mattered. The scent moved when the wind changed. Raven lifted her head. Somewhere at the high road, distant through snow and metal and wind, Scout cried once. Grace had opened the truck door just enough. One short call. It moved through the night, thin and bright, a thread thrown across white distance. Raven's whole body changed. Her ears came forward. Her head turned toward the sound. Flint stood on unsteady legs. Birch pressed closer to her mother's chest. Scout cried a second time, softer. Then the sound stopped. Grace had closed the door exactly as planned. Ryan did not look back. He kept his hands still. Raven stepped down from the pallet. Her front paws touched the snow-dusted floor. She stopped, looked at the carrier, then at Ryan, then at the pups behind her. A gust struck the warehouse. The roof answered with a deep metallic groan. Snow slid above them. Tyler whispered, "That is bad." Megan lifted one finger. "Wait." Raven retreated to the pallet and shoved Flint back with her nose. Birch made a faint sound, tired and thin. Ryan's jaw clenched so hard his teeth hurt. Grace could not treat puppies she could not reach. Megan could not paperwork the roof into mercy. Tyler could not shovel weight off a collapsing building in whiteout. Ryan could not fight weather. All they had was the promise they had repeated for 2 weeks. Same distance, same hands, same patience. Raven stepped down again. One paw reached the carrier threshold. She smelled the towel, the food, the blanket, Scout, Ryan's house clinic, soap heat. She placed the other front paw inside. The carrier creaked under her weight. Ryan did not move. Tyler kept the light low, though his arm trembled. Megan's face held no expression but attention. Raven backed out suddenly. Ryan's chest sank, then steadied. No command, no pressure. The door remained open. Raven turned to the pups. Flint nosed toward her shoulder. Birch lifted her small face and whined once. Above them, the bowed beam at the roofline made a sharp cracking sound, clearer than wind, closer than warning. Snow sifted down in a cold curtain over the pallet where Flint and Birch stood. Raven whipped toward the sound body between her pups and the roof, and Ryan saw the decision forming in her eyes, not trust, not surrender, but calculation pressed by love and weather. She looked at the carrier again. Then she took one slow step toward it as the beam overhead bent lower. The whiteout wrapped the Duluth warehouse in a moving wall, and inside the old freight building, the cold seemed to gather beneath the roof and wait. Snow filtered down through the cracked seam above Raven, Flint, and Birch, landing on their backs in pale dust that melted, froze, and melted again with every hard breath. Ryan stayed on one knee beside the open carrier, hands flat on his thighs, water soaking through his pant leg where old snow had turned to slush under him. The beam overhead bent lower with a sound like a man trying not to cry out. Tyler's headlamp shook once, then steadied. Megan did not move toward Raven. That restraint had a force to it. Ryan could feel it, the discipline of every person in the room refusing to help in the way that would make things worse. Raven looked at the carrier, then at the pups, then at the doorway beyond Ryan where the storm clawed at the opening but did not block it. Her amber eyes met Ryan's. There was no gratitude there. He was glad. Gratitude would have been too human, too neat, too easy. There was suspicion, exhaustion, calculation, and the fierce pressure of a mother measuring every danger at once. Ryan lowered his voice until it almost disappeared beneath the wind. Good choices right there. Raven's torn ear twitched. He did not know if she heard the words. He hoped she heard the absence of demand. Flint stumbled from the pallet, slipping on the dusting of snow. Raven nudged him back, but he pushed against her shoulder and made a tiny, frustrated sound. Birch huddled behind the torn canvas, trembling. The roof cracked again. Not a groan this time. A split. Snow slid down the slanted metal in a heavy sheet and crashed somewhere deeper in the warehouse, sending white powder rolling across the floor. Raven flinched toward the pups. Ryan's whole body wanted to lunge. He did not. His fingers pressed into his thighs hard enough to hurt. Megan spoke from the side, low and even. Still open. Still her choice. Tyler's breath came rough through his scarf. Come on, girl, he whispered, then seemed to realize he had spoken and went silent. Raven stepped into the carrier with both front paws. She backed out again. No one reacted. The carrier did not move. The door did not swing. The towel smelled of Scout. The food steamed faintly in the cold. Raven stepped in a third time, deeper, her shoulders passing the threshold. She stopped with her hind paws outside and looked back. Flint did not wait for instruction. He crawled toward her belly, half falling, half climbing, driven by warmth and the authority of milk and heartbeat. Raven turned awkwardly inside the carrier, making room despite the tight space. Her dignity did not fit, but she brought it anyway. Birch hesitated at the pallet edge, small body locked by cold or fear. Grace was too far away to help. Ryan kept still until the act of stillness felt like tearing cloth inside him. Then he shifted only his eyes toward Birch and softened his voice. Little one. Raven watched him through the carrier vents. Not warning. Watching. Tyler lowered his light until it showed the floor between Birch and the carrier. Birch took one step. Her legs splayed. She sat down hard, looking offended by gravity at the worst possible time. Tyler made a sound that might have become a laugh on a warmer night. Respectfully, Birch, now is a terrible time for a sit-down protest. Megan shot him one look. He shut his mouth. Birch tried again. Flint wriggled inside the carrier, pressed against Raven's belly, and let out a muffled squeak. That sound did what no human hand could have done. Birch lifted her head and stumbled forward. Raven stretched her neck out of the carrier as far as she couldn't, leaving it, not breaking the decision, only reaching. Birch reached the towel at the threshold and collapsed halfway in. Raven gripped the loose blanket edge with her teeth and tugged, drawing the puppy toward her body. Ryan's throat tightened. He kept his hands open. Birch disappeared against Raven's chest. All three were inside. Megan moved then, but not straight at the door. She approached from the side, slow enough that every step asked permission. Raven's eyes followed her. The door had been tied open, and now Megan untied it with fingers made clumsy by cold. The roof moaned. A line of snow dropped from above and struck the floor beside the pallet. Raven rose halfway. Ryan placed one hand lightly on top of the carrier, not over the door, not trapping, only steadying the plastic before fear made it rattle. Still here, he said. Megan swung the door inward. The latch clicked. Raven flinched, but she did not throw herself against it. She lowered her head over Flint and Birch. For 1 second, Ryan saw the exact shape of trust before it became a prettier word. It was not comfort. It was choosing the least dangerous door because all the other doors had lied worse. "Lift," Megan said. Ryan took the rear handle. Tyler took the front with both hands. The carrier was heavier than Ryan expected, not in pounds, but in the strange weight of lives that had agreed to be carried without understanding the route. They stepped backward toward the entrance. Snow and wind hit them as soon as they cleared the doorway. The roof behind them gave another crack, louder, followed by a heavy slide. Tyler shouted, "Move!" Megan snapped, "Walk." They walked fast, not running, because running on iced boards with a loaded carrier would make a rescue into a mess. Ryan felt every shift inside the carrier through the handle. Raven's body moved with the pups. Flint squeaked once. Birch made no sound. The service lane had nearly vanished. Their footprints from minutes earlier were shallow ghosts. The safety rope guided them through the white. Tyler stumbled once and recovered with a noise that suggested he had negotiated privately with his knees. "Safe-ish," he gasped. "Less talking," Megan said, but her hand caught the back of his jacket for 1 second when he slipped again. The high road appeared as a blur of headlights. Grace was already out of Ryan's truck with Scout bundled under her coat. Nora stood beside her, holding towels to her chest, lips moving in prayer or argument with God, perhaps both. When Scout saw the carrier, she gave a sharp cry that cut through wind. Raven's head lifted inside. Ryan felt the movement through the plastic. Grace did not bring Scout close. She let the sound reach Raven, then stepped back toward the truck heat. "Clinic," Grace said. "Now." They loaded the carrier into the warmed rear of Megan's county truck. Nora opened a thermos with shaking hands and said, "I told you the chicken was essential equipment." Tyler laughed too loudly, the laugh of a man discovering he had been scared only after the worst second had passed. At the clinic, light and heat took over. Towels, low voices, doors held open, the smell of disinfectant and warm blankets. Grace checked Raven first because the mother had carried the longest burden. Raven remained in the carrier until Grace and Megan prepared a recovery pen with heat pads, clean bedding, and space enough for her to step out by choice. When the door opened, Raven looked at Ryan, then Grace, then the pen. She stepped out, legs trembling, and immediately turned for the pups. Flint tried to stand and failed into his own paws. Birch tucked beneath Raven's chest and vanished into warmth. Only then did Grace bring Scout. Ryan held the puppy loosely wrapped in the blue towels, twin from Nora's bag. Scout trembled so hard her little teeth clicked once. Raven lifted her head. For a moment the storm, the warehouse, the road closure, and the cracked roof all fell away. Ryan lowered Scout to the edge of the pen while Grace kept one hand ready. Scout leaned forward. Raven stretched her neck. Their noses touched barely, a small contact that seemed too quiet for all it had survived. Raven breathed in. Scout went still, then Raven lowered her head enough for Scout to smell her face. Nora cried without pretending she had something in her eye. Tyler stared at the ceiling with unnecessary intensity. Megan wrote on her clipboard, though the pen paused a long time before moving. Grace touched Ryan's shoulder. "You did not rush," she said. Outside, the storm kept throwing snow against the windows. Inside, Raven lay with all 3 puppies within reach, and Ryan stood back empty-handed, understanding for the first time in years that empty did not always mean failure. Morning after the rescue came cold and bright over Duluth, and the snow that had looked violent in darkness now lay across the city in deep white drifts glittering under a thin winter sun. The harbor was still half buried, the service roads still blocked, and the old warehouse roof had given way sometime before dawn. Folding into the nest Raven had abandoned like a warning delivered late, but not too late. At North Shore Animal Care, the world was smaller and warmer. Raven and the 3 puppies rested in the back recovery room where Grace kept the lights low and the heat steady. Flint, who had survived the night with the attitude of a very small security guard, slept with one paw over Birch's face. Birch accepted this for 7 minutes, then kicked him in the ear with a strength that made Grace whisper, "Good girl." Scout visited in Ryan's arms because she believed walking was a public right and medical supervision was tyranny. She smelled Raven's pen, saw her siblings, and made a noise so full of joy and complaint that Tyler, standing in the doorway, said, "That puppy has a grievance department." Raven watched everything, not relaxed, not tame. Those words would have insulted her. She stayed between the people and her pups, but the sharp edge in her gaze changed when Grace moved slowly, when Nora left food near the door and stepped away, when Megan approached from the side with the same calm pattern she had used in the warehouse. Trust did not arrive like sunrise. It arrived like a cautious animal sniffing every inch before placing weight. Ryan understood that better than he wanted to. He returned to the clinic twice a day, sometimes more, always telling himself he came because Scout had checkups. That was partly true. Scout needed weight checks, worming medicine. Small meals, careful monitoring, and a firm discussion about why stethoscopes were not prey. But Ryan also came because the recovery room had become the place where the whole story breathed. Grace kept charts in neat rows. Raven, sable, German Shepherd, female, likely 3 years old, underweight, stress-reactive, lactating, no chip found yet. Scout, female, pup, 9 weeks, estimated hypothermia, recovery, mild leg abrasion. Flint and Birch, littermates, cold, stress improving. Megan handled the official parts with a seriousness that made even Tyler lower his jokes to a respectful volume. Notices were filed. Stray hold periods began. Photos were taken without crowding the animals. Adoption applications waited until medical clearance. Kindness has paperwork, Megan told Ryan one afternoon while checking his fenced yard. People forget that. They want the warm picture. Animals need the boring truth. Food that arrives, doors that latch, vets paid. People who stay after the cute part eats their glove. Ryan stood near his back gate while Scout sat on his boot and chewed the end of his shoelace with professional concentration. "I know." Megan looked down at Scout. "She planning to keep you?" Ryan followed her gaze. Scout looked up, lace in her mouth, expression innocent enough to convict them both. "That is under discussion. The committee seems decisive." He almost smiled. "Not fully. Enough." Nora turned Bennett's Diner into an unofficial supply station. The jar by the register filled with bills, coins, handwritten notes, and a suspicious number of buttons from children who had decided round objects belonged together. Someone donated puppy pads, someone else brought blankets. A retired nurse left a heating pad with instructions written in large, careful letters. Nora taped a note above the jar that read, "Thank you for helping Raven and the snow babies." Ryan stopped in front of it after ordering coffee. "You changed the sign. They are no longer a rumor." "I can reimburse the clinic." Nora slid his coffee over. "You can also let people love something without auditing them." A man at the counter coughed into his napkin to hide a laugh. Ryan paid in exact cash, then added another 20 to the jar because the town had started to feel like a net being mended around him, one knot at a time. He did not know if he liked that. He knew it was holding. Tyler visited after plow shifts, bringing updates about the warehouse roof and pretending not to care about Flint. This failed badly. Flint took to barking at Tyler's boot from inside the recovery pen, a sound smaller than a squeaky hinge, but full of ancient authority. "He respects me," Tyler said. Grace checked Flint's weight. He thinks your laces are weak. Leadership comes in many forms. Birch was quieter. She liked Nora's voice and fell asleep when Nora read diner inventory aloud from a stool outside the recovery room. 3 bags flour, 2 boxes tea, 1 case napkins. Lord have mercy, Tyler used half the salt again. Raven listened, head on her paws, amber eyes still watchful but not hard. Nora never reached for her. That was why Raven began to let her sit closer. Ryan noticed. Nora noticed him noticing and said nothing, which was unusually merciful. Scout settled into Ryan's house as if she had been hired to reorganize it by emotional force. The mudroom bench was no longer a clean sleeping station. It had a folded blanket at one end, a chew toy under it, and a tiny tooth mark on the leg. Ryan still slept there most nights, but Scout objected to the distance between the bench and her preferred spot, so he placed her bed nearby. Then she crawled out of the bed and slept against his boot. He checked the locks less often, not because fear had gone, but because interruption had become warm and breathing. He would touch the bolt once, maybe twice, and Scout would sit with the puzzled patience of a creature wondering why humans distrusted doors after closing them. On the 4th night after the rescue, a plow blade slammed against a ridge of ice outside. Ryan woke upright, reaching for a weapon that was not there. Scout woke too, scrambled up the bench in a heroic failure of pause and pressed her head beneath his palm. He sat breathing in the dark. The furnace ticked. Snow tapped the window. Scout's ribs moved under his hand. Steady, real, insisting on this room rather than any older one. "All right," he whispered. "All right." At the clinic, Grace began discussing placements gently. Scout had bonded to Ryan. That was obvious to everyone, including Ryan, who made the mistake of denying it while Scout was asleep across both his boots. Flint and Birch might do well together if a home could manage 2 German Shepherd puppies and the level of chaos employed. Tyler's family had a fenced yard on the hillside above the harbor, a father who grumbled but repaired things properly, and younger cousins old enough to learn how not to squeeze animals. Raven would need longer, much longer. No one pretended otherwise. "She cannot be a symbol," Grace told Ryan as they watched Raven from the hall. "Not for you, not for Nora, not for the town. She is a dog with fear, milk teeth, history, and choices, same as Scout. Scout has history. Scout has already attempted to eat my clipboard twice. That is a pattern." Ryan looked through the glass. Scout stood at the low barrier, tail wagging so hard her whole back end moved while Raven watched her from the pen. Flint crawled over Birch. Birch expressed an opinion with one paw. Raven lowered her head and let Scout touch noses through the gap. Ryan felt the ache before he understood it. The family might not end under one roof. The picture would be incomplete. He knew something about incomplete pictures. Megan appeared beside him with a folder. "Adoption review can start tomorrow if you are ready." Ryan looked down at Scout, who had turned from the barrier and was now trying to fit her entire mouth around the rubber stopper on Megan's boot. "I am not sure anyone is ready." Megan looked at the puppy. "Ready is overrated. Honest is useful." From the recovery pen, Raven lifted her head and stared past them toward Nora, who had entered quietly with a bowl of warm food. For the first time, Raven stood and took 2 steps toward the woman without being called. Nora stopped moving at once, tears bright in her eyes, but her hands perfectly still. No one spoke. Raven sniffed the air between them, then lowered her head to the bowl Nora had placed on the floor. It was not adoption. Not trust. Not yet. But it was a door opening by the width of a breath, and every person in the hallway understood enough to let silence hold it. The weeks after the blizzard held Duluth in a hard, glittering cold with sunlight on snowbanks, steam rising from diner vents, and the lake shining dark beyond the harbor like a thing too large to freeze completely. The city went back to ordinary winter work. Plows widened streets. Men shoveled roofs. Children climbed snow piles that parents had already forbidden twice. The old warehouse became a fenced hazard with caution signs and a sagging roofline that made Tyler mutter, "That building owes us an apology." Inside North Shore, animal care recovery continued without drama, which Grace insisted was the highest form of success. Flint gained weight first and used the extra strength to start unnecessary disputes with towels. Birch followed more slowly, blooming by ounces than by attitude. Scout, now rounder through the belly and confident in the criminal possibilities of paper towels, arrived with Ryan every Sunday afternoon for supervised visits. Raven watched these visits from the covered recovery yard behind the clinic. She did not rush her pups. She did not become the soft story some people wanted. She remained careful, alert, and slow with every new thing. But when Scout tumbled through the snow toward the fence, Raven's ears rose. When Flint barked at Tyler's snow shovel, Raven sighed in a way that made Nora say, "Motherhood is universal." Nora had become Raven's chosen weather. She sat outside the recovery yard most mornings with a thermos beside her and read whatever she had in her apron pocket. Sometimes recipes, sometimes supply lists, sometimes a psalm copied in her own handwriting because the Bible at the diner had gravy on 2 Corinthians. And she had decided not to discuss how. 2 sacks potatoes, 4 onions, napkins if Tyler did not use them all in the truck. She would read while Raven lay 10 feet away, pretending not to listen. Then one day Raven lay 9 feet away, then 7. Nora never reached. That was the miracle of it. She made room and let the dog decide whether the room could be trusted. Ryan watched from the clinic door one morning, Scout asleep against his ankle. "You are good with her," he said. Nora did not look away from Raven. "I am good at waiting. There is a difference. Still counts." She smiled a little. "Do not hand me compliments before coffee, Ryan. I might drop them." Her face changed after that, not toward sadness exactly, but toward the place sadness slept when no one was poking it. After Jack died, people kept bringing casseroles and advice. I appreciated the casseroles, the advice I could have fed to the gulls. Everyone wanted me to come inside, move on open curtains, join committees, smile at Christmas. Raven understands thresholds better than people. You do not cross just because someone warm says you should. Ryan looked at the dog lying in the pale sun, amber eyes half closed but not sleeping. "No, you have one too." He knew what she meant. The bedroom upstairs, the door he passed every night on his way to the mudroom bench. He did not answer. Nora let him keep the silence, which was one of her kinder habits when she chose to use it. Megan cleared Tyler's family for Flint and Birch after an inspection that made Tyler's father repair the back gate, reinforce a section of fence, remove a stack of old paint cans from the garage, and promise not to let the younger cousins name any animal after food without family review. Tyler argued that Meatball was a strong name. Megan stared at him until he withdrew the proposal. The Brooks house sat on the hillside above the harbor, blue-gray with white trim, and a backyard that sloped toward a view of Lake Superior. Flint claimed the bottom step as a lookout post within 6 minutes. Birch found a sheltered spot beneath an overturned sled and fell asleep with her nose on Flint's tail. Tyler stood in the yard watching them with hands shoved into his pockets. "My dad says 2 puppies is a lot." Ryan leaned against the fence. "He is correct. I used to think this city was just snow removal rent and old men yelling about parking." Flint barked at a shovel leaning against the garage as if defending civilization. Tyler smiled despite himself. "Now I think maybe a place is not stuck while people still show up when the weather gets ugly." Ryan nodded. There were answers a person could only hear after cold had reached the floorboards. Scout's adoption moved from discussion to paperwork, because everyone had stopped pretending. Ryan answered Megan's questions honestly. Could he handle training? He would learn. Could he pay for vet care? Yes. Would he work with Grace on socialization and not treat Scout as a cure for his own wounds? That one made him pause. Scout sat beneath the clinic desk at his feet, chewing the shoelace she had been negotiating with for weeks. She is not a cure, he said. She is a responsibility. Grace, behind the counter, looked at him as if that answer mattered more than a pretty one. Megan approved the adoption 2 days later. The pen made a plain black line across the form. No music rose. No lights changed. Scout sneezed under the desk and tried to steal Megan's pen. Nora brought cinnamon rolls to the diner that afternoon because, according to her adoption paperwork, deserved icing if nobody cried directly on the documents. Ryan looked at his name beside Scout's and did not feel as if he owned her. He felt as if he had been trusted with a promise small enough to trip over her own feet and large enough to rearrange a life. Raven's road stayed slower. She remained at the clinic through the next stretch of cold while her milk dried and her strength returned. Nora came every day. She brought food, sat near the fence, read, hummed when the wind picked up, and left before wanting became pressure. On a pale Sunday, Grace opened the gate to the recovery yard, while Nora stood outside with a leash hanging loose from one hand. No coaxing, no bright voice. Raven stood beneath the small roofed shelter, nose working, body tense. She looked at Grace, then Megan, then Ryan standing far back with Scout on a leash. Scout wagged with her entire body but somehow stayed quiet, an accomplishment that deserved civic recognition. Raven stepped once toward Nora, stopped. Snow slid from a branch onto the yard fence. Raven flinched. Nora did not move. "No rush," Nora said softly. "The porch has waited for worse company." Raven blinked. Then she stepped again. The first night at Nora's house, Raven slept on the covered porch outside the kitchen door. Nora did not call her in. The second night, Raven slept on a folded quilt near the threshold. The third, she put her front paws inside, sniffed the warm air, and backed out as if the linoleum had asked a personal question. Nora kept stirring soup. "Suit yourself," she said. "The soup is not offended." On the sixth evening, snow fell lightly instead of hard, soft flakes, turning the street lamps gold. Raven stood on the porch for a long time while Nora dried mugs at the sink. Then the dog stepped across the threshold, one paw, then the next, and lay down near the old radiator by the wall. Nora did not clap. She did not call anyone. She did not even turn fast. She only smiled down and whispered, "There you are." Later, during the first Sunday visit behind the clinic, Scout, Flint, and Birch crashed through the snow together while Raven watched from beside Nora's chair. Grace held coffee. Megan held forms. Tyler held a toy and lost control of the game almost immediately. Scout pressed her nose to Raven's cheek. Flint leaned against her shoulder. Birch tucked beneath her chin. The family was not all under one roof. The mother was not suddenly carefree. Ryan was not healed. Still, nothing was lost beyond reach. That evening, he drove home with Scout asleep on the passenger seat, paws twitching from dreams of snow. At his house, he opened the door, stepped inside, and touched the lock once. Click. His hand hovered. Scout dropped a stolen napkin on his boot. Ryan laughed quietly and took his hand away. Then he turned toward the hallway and saw the bedroom door upstairs, standing half open, waiting like a country he had not yet learned how to enter. Snow fell gently over Duluth on the Sunday Nora signed Raven's foster to adopt papers, softer than the storm that had nearly taken her. Soft enough that each flake seemed to take its time deciding where to land. Bennett's diner had closed early, though the coffee stayed hot because Nora considered cold coffee a moral decline. In the fenced yard behind the diner, a folding table stood under the porch light with mugs. cinnamon rolls, a stack of forms, and a bowl of dog treats that Scout discovered before anyone gave permission. Ryan stood near the gate with Scout's leash looped around one hand. He wore the navy parka, again washed now, but still marked in the lining where one small puppy had slept against him on the worst morning of her life. Scout had grown into a rounder version of herself, black and tan coat. Glossy white paw mark bright against the snow, one ear almost upright and the other still conducting its own private investigation. She watched the treat bowl with holy concentration. "No," Ryan said. "Scout sat. That was not agreement, that was strategy." Grace laughed into her coffee. Megan stood beside the table in a gray coat paperwork, clipped in perfect order, expression stern enough to make joy behave itself. Tyler arrived through the back gate with Flint and Birch, both on leashes, both deeply committed to making the entrance memorable. Flint, bigger through the shoulders, now charged toward Scout and stopped only because Tyler had learned to plant his boots. Birch trotted behind, sable coat shining with little snowflakes, pale nose stripe pointed like an arrow toward trouble. "We practiced calm arrival," Tyler said as Flint spun in a circle and tangled his own leash. Megan looked at him. "The paperwork will reflect an attempt." Nora came out of the kitchen last with Raven beside her. Not behind, beside. The sable German shepherd moved with careful dignity, black back dark under the porch light, torn ear tilted toward every sound. Amber eyes alert but no longer sharpened by constant flight. She paused at the top step and looked over the yard. Scout froze. Flint stopped wrestling the leash. Birch lifted her head from the snowbank she had been inspecting with her mouth. For one breath, the pups and their mother held the same invisible thread. Raven came down the steps by choice. Nora kept the leash loose. No one called out. No one turned the moment into a performance. Raven crossed the yard and allowed Scout to press her nose beneath her chin. Flint leaned against her shoulder as if returning to a door that still remembered him. Birch tucked close, then immediately tried to steal the treat Scout had been planning to steal. Raven sighed. Nora looked at Ryan. She has accepted that the children are disorderly. Strong parenting. I am learning from her. Grace checked the signatures at the table while the dogs moved through the yard. The arrangement was not the picture some people would have demanded. Scout would live with Ryan. Flint and Birch would stay with Tyler's family up the hill. Raven would remain with Nora first under the foster-to-adopt agreement, then for good if the next weeks continued well. They would meet on Sundays when weather allowed. Sometimes at the clinic, sometimes behind the diner, sometimes in Tyler's yard where the puppies had already discovered an upside-down sled and declared it a fortress of questionable legal standing. The family had been rearranged, not erased. Close enough for scent, close enough for play, close enough for memory to keep a path open through snow. Megan handed Nora the final page. "You understand the timeline. Follow-up visit in 30 days. Fence check after the thaw. Veterinary schedule remains with Grace." Nora accepted the pen. Her hand paused above the line. Ryan saw Jack's shadow pass through her face, not as a ghost, but as old love making room for new responsibility. She signed. Raven, who had been watching Scout and Birch argue over the same snowball, turned her head at the scratch of the pen. Nora looked at her and smiled. "There," she said, "officially temporary." Tyler snorted. Grace shook her head. Megan dated the form. Ryan thought of how often people used temporary when they were afraid to say love out loud. He had used it for Scout. Nora had used it for Raven. The word had served its purpose. Then it had worn out. Before leaving, Ryan walked to the fence where Tyler stood holding both puppy leashes with the exhausted pride of a man who had discovered love came with mudbills and the need for better gloves. "You doing all right?" Ryan asked. Tyler looked at Flint, who was attempting to intimidate a snow shovel, then at Birch, who was sleeping on one of his boots. "I am outnumbered." "That was not the question." Tyler smiled faintly. "Yeah, I think so. My dad says the yard feels alive again." He looked toward Nora, who had one hand resting loose near Raven's shoulder, without touching unless Raven leaned in. "Funny thing, I thought showing up in weather like that was the big part. Turns out the big part is showing up every day after." Ryan nodded. That was the truth nobody put in rescue stories because it did not shine from a distance. Food bowls, training sessions, vet bills, patience after the applause, the kind of love that did not look dramatic unless a person understood how long winter could last. At dusk, Ryan drove home with Scout asleep on the passenger seat, her paws twitching from a day of running with Flint and Birch. Lake Superior lay dark beyond the harbor, and the city lights climbed the hill behind it. Warm squares against snow. The old warehouses were fenced off now, their damaged roof partly covered with a blue tarp that snapped in the wind. Ryan slowed as he passed the service road. He remembered the dock where he had heard Scout's first thin cry, the warehouse where Raven chose the carrier, the whiteout that had erased every footprint almost as soon as it was made. Scout woke and lifted her head. "Almost home," he said. She yawned as if she had supervised the entire rescue and found the staff adequate. At the house, Ryan opened the front door. Scout trotted in first, carrying a stick she had found at the diner and apparently adopted without paperwork. Ryan stepped inside and closed the door. His hand went to the lock. Click. He stood still. His body expected the second check. Then the third. It supplied reasons with the old efficiency. Wood swells, cold warps metal, people forget things, peace is a trick that fails when trusted. Scout dropped the stick on his boot. It was not a message from heaven. It was a puppy making poor storage choices. Still, Ryan looked down and laughed quietly. "All right," he said. He took his hand away. The world did not end. The door stayed closed. The house remained standing. Scout picked up the stick and marched toward the stairs with great importance. Ryan followed to the hallway, then stopped at the bottom step. The bedroom upstairs had waited for more than a year. With clean sheets and an unused quilt, patient as a room can be when it has no pride. Tonight it did not look harmless. Not exactly. It looked possible. Ryan washed Scout's bowl, set out water, turned off the kitchen light, and climbed the stairs. Scout came after him, nails clicking with official urgency. In the bedroom, the window faced the dark street. The door remained visible from the bed if he turned his head. His body cataloged the room. Corners, shadows, the small sound of heat in the pipes, the softness of the mattress under his hand. He did not make a speech to himself. Men like him had heard enough speeches about moving on, letting go, being strong, finding closure. None of those speeches had known what to do at 2 in the morning, when a snowplow blade sounded like metal from another life. So he made no promise to be healed. He simply sat on the bed. Scout put her front paws on the mattress and attempted a climb that failed completely. Ryan lifted her. She turned 3 circles, collapsed against his thigh, then crawled until her head rested beneath his palm. Ryan lay down. The mattress was too soft. The window was still a window. The night still held noises. Then Scout sighed, long and warm and satisfied, as if the universe had arranged itself around her nap schedule. Ryan kept his hand on her back. Outside, snow fell through the dark over Duluth, over Nora's diner where Raven slept near the kitchen radiator, over Tyler's yard where Flint and Birch dreamed in a pile of paws, over Grace's clinic with its clean pens and careful charts, over Megan's county truck parked beneath a street lamp dusted white. Ryan stayed awake for a while, not cured, not untouched by memory, simply listening to the house remain a house. At some point his thoughts loosened. His hand stayed on Scout. Morning came pale and quiet through the window, and for the first time in years, Ryan Whitaker woke in a bed with a small German shepherd breathing beside him in a city of snow outside that no longer felt like something he had to face alone. Sometimes healing does not arrive like thunder. Sometimes it comes through a small paw on a cold floor, a bowl left beside a back door, a neighbor who refuses to let grief become a locked room, or a night when someone tired learns that accepting help is not weakness. Ryan did not find peace by becoming strong enough to need no one. He found a better kind of strength by waiting, listening, and letting love arrive on its own feet. May this story remind us that God often places quiet miracles in our path when our hearts feel frozen shut. If it touched you, write Amen in the comments, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more stories of loyalty, grace, and second chances. May your home be warmed by patience, your burdens be shared by kind hands, and your heart stay open when love knocks softly.